go live. So hopefully in a moment that should turn red, and it has. Awesome. So I'm here with Andy. Andy is someone who, like myself, likes to sort of talk politics and social issues online on a sort of left-wing trajectory, the same way that I am. And hopefully we can have a nice chat today about all things politics from a British perspective. You know, I like to spend a bit of time across the pond thinking about stuff, but hopefully today we'll talk a little bit about the UK and things happening on our side of the Atlantic. How are you today, Andy?
I'm very good, thank you. I'm just perplexed how you ended up finding me because I'm such a small YouTube channel, so I've clearly benefited from the algorithm, and I think this is an excellent concept as someone that I like debating. I was just saying offline to you, I would do this offline anyway. So anyone who's in the chat, hi to you guys. Thanks for joining. But yeah, I think this is a really excellent concept, and I like the idea of debating in a kind of more gentle, calm, and more polite fashion. So yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank
Um,
you, thank you.
yeah,
To answer
yeah.
your question, actually, my algorithm or sort of search criteria, I don't. I'm not. I think because I've started seeing more content from across the spectrum of politics and such, I get quite a lot of smaller videos appear in my recommended. Um, so as well, I mean, it also. I think I muted quite a bit of like Charlie Kirk stuff a few months ago when all that was going on. Um, and so because I've filtered out quite a lot of the larger content creators, I get a nice sample of the small stuff. But in a way, I kind of prefer that because I find when you have the massive channels, they're doing a lot of things for that clickbait stuff, that sort of deliberately trying to amp up the scale of things to try and get the audience, and then you inevitably end up sort of just trying to say stuff to get the most views. So in some ways, you get a more authentic perspective from people like ourselves who maybe aren't YouTube millionaires, but are sort of just going about our everyday, having nice chats like this one, hopefully.
Well, yes, indeed, yes, and I should probably, I'll probably to help your audience or for anyone that is watching, I'll briefly explain the concept of my own channel. So, I'm like yourself, a political obsessive, a political junkie. I love digesting politics in the news. It's just second nature to me. I think I lifted a lot of it from my parents. So interesting household. So my dad's a socialist, but he's still begrudgingly a member of the Labour Party because he's always had this fear of splitting the vote. And I even said to him, I was on a phone call yesterday. I said, oh, because it was the first time we talked about the Gaunton and Denton by-election. I said, oh, will you be probably voting Green? And I told him the opinion polls because they've gone up to 21% in YouGov. So anyone that doesn't know who are not in the UK, the Green Party has traditionally been a sort of green politics ecology party, much like the Green Party of Canada or the Green Party in America. But they've had a new leader named Zach Polanski, who's kind of gone on an eco-socialist, populist kind of platform, which is more to my dad's politics. And I said to him, will you be voting Green after this? He said, no. I said, why? I said, why, Dad? You know, they're left wing, they're socialist. You talk positively about them. He said, I am so scared of reform getting in this area. I'm not chancing it. And I think really that kind of shows how broken our electoral system is, and which is why I think it's quite important we're having this conversation because it's from what I gather, you're quite on the left. I'm on the left of the Lib Dems, which is probably not very left for a lot of people. But I think because of our electoral system, 2029 is going to be quite a significant election. And I think this is where left-wing political, left, progressive, whatever, basically anti-Tory, anti-reform need to really work together. And I'm a great believer in pluralism, cooperation, and locking out the worst evil, as one would say. So anyway, back on the concept of the channel. So I always wanted to do a political channel. I wanted to do like kind of restist politics, a different bias. I don't know if people know that channel, a different bias. But basically a kind of podcast style where I would do daily reporting of the news and politics and give my own commentary and invite people to debate the rolling news events. So the channel that I just mentioned, A Different Bias, he's been a good inspiration for me because he's a Labour member. Well, he was a Labour member, I should say. He's on the soft left of Labour. He's not a party bigwig. Never stood for political office or never stood as a political advisory role. Oh, technical issues.
Keep going. I'm trying to sort it subtly in the background.
No worries. But he reports daily politics. He reports the daily politics of the day and the news events. And as the name suggests, A Different Bias, he reports it from a kind of Labour perspective. Because I actually do think there's a lot of truth in what he says. I think no matter if you're on the centre left, on the left, when it comes to media, you're always going to get a tough time with the media, particularly the sort of Tory clientele. So the Tory press, GB News, Talk TV. So, and I know a lot of people on the left probably feel like Labour aren't doing enough that kind of would satisfy them. But I do think a lot of it is a lot of right-wing noise. They're deliberately trying to undermine Labour as best they can and not going far enough on the more, what I find quite disgraceful views from Labour when it comes to trans rights and immigration. So they were never gonna win that space, and I don't understand why Shabana Mahmood is trying to out-reform because they were never going to win that space anyway. But anyway, I'm sort of drifting off topic. The joys of having ADHD, people. So anyway, so A Different Bias, as the name suggests, he tries to report from a Labour perspective and tries to present facts and information that otherwise might get escaped from the mainstream media, away from that kind of mainstream Tory press. And he used to be a science teacher. So bearing in mind, this is a guy who's never had political office. He's not a party advisor. He's just a simple Labour member who's very passionate about politics. And he managed to he records this all in his shed. And over time, he's now got thousands of subscribers. He gets about 40,000 views. It's not about the views, but the fact that he's managed to work so hard. And
243,000 it says this, so doing well for himself.
Yeah, and he's no longer a science teacher. He now does this as a living. So he's always been very grateful. I don't always agree with his opinions because I am mindful that he's, he was a Labour member, and I think sometimes there are some things that I think, I don't know if I think he's kind of reaching here. I think he's reaching a little bit, but he always presents it with facts and data because that's the scientist in him, and I just think it makes me stop for thought. It makes me think a lot. So I wanted to do that originally, but then because I work full time, I realised that I could not do that. I didn't have the bandwidth or the capacity to do it. So instead of doing it like that, what I originally wanted to do, I decided I will debate political history, political legacies. So I've done one where I had a debate on the legacy of Margaret Thatcher. I then had one where we debated the coalition years because as a Lib Dem, it's quite a sore subject for me, and I have there are things that I can speak positively, but there's also a lot of things because even though I'm a party member, I'm quite an independent-minded party member. And there were some things that felt like betrayal. And I always think the tuition fees was a betrayal. And I don't think it's something we've ever recovered from. But we had a debate on that. And I also do political history and retrospective. So I'm doing one on the SDP at the moment, which if you're someone on the left of politics, the SDP was probably seen as a betrayal from that perspective. The turncoats going over to form their own party, your Roy Jenkins. But what I learned from that is that actually it's a lot more complex than that and a lot more colourful. And it's not as black and white. So if there's anything that I'm trying to achieve with this channel, is that really history often repeats itself. I also try and aim to have my kind of pluralistic ethos and sort of show the complexities and how really if we just all and sort of learn from history and using history and political legacies and look backs as a kind of template of how we can improve politics today. So that's really what the channel's about, really. It's more of a political history, political retrospective, and a plan to do one on the legacy of Tony Blair, which that will be a beast in itself because, again, I'm on the left of the Lib Dems. My idol was Charles Kennedy. I don't know if anyone can remember or even knows of Charles Kennedy, but he was against the Iraq War. He was talking about a 50% rate of income tax, spending more on public services, when we did advocate for free tuition fees, but free social care, free personal care. And he was against the and because it feels really fitting with what's going on with the world, he was against the Iraq War. So he tagged himself to the left of Labour. Yeah. And that's when I discovered the Lib Dems and became a party member. And so, but yeah, the legacy of Tony Blair will be a very interesting one because I do remember personally benefiting from Tony Blair. And I think it's quite saddening that his legacy was so tainted by the Iraq War and the private financial initiatives, because I can remember going into my primary school under the final years of John Major. We had worn out textbooks. It was in a cold Victorian building. We were literally freezing. And my parents were working class and they literally lived hand to mouth. But then within 3 or 4 years, our life had improved. We had working tax credits. We were able to go away abroad. We had a new school building that was fully heated, interactive whiteboards, everything. And I think it's quite tragic that I can't look at the positives of Tony Blair, but I can only think of the Iraq War and the cock-up that was the PFIs. So that's kind of went to a bit of a tangent there, but that's you go.
Okay, that's okay.
Gives you a bit of flavour about me.
I was enjoying actually the sort of nice little channel history and sort of some of your perspectives, and there's a lot there which you can now springboard off on and sort of talk about. Just before we do though, in the chat, YouTube group, friend of the channel, said that my microphone is a little bit quiet and muffled. Now I don't know how I'm sounding to you, Andy, but
you're a bit quiet, but I can hear you fine. I can hear you fine.
Now, actually, this microphone is probably the cheapest thing I've ever purchased. It's literally, there's no volume control. I think I can do it manually on the app. So, if I try that quickly, I'll turn mine up a little bit, and if I turn you down very slightly, perhaps this sounds okay. Hopefully, and I'll try and pin that to the shirt and.
I can definitely hear an improvement there. Yes.
Fantastic, brilliant. My GCSE in IT is coming to fruition.
Well, I'm actually a data engineer, but a lot of people think I can work with Windows, which is not. I'm not hardware. I'm software. I can work with codes. Ask me to repair a physical computer, I'm lost. And anything to do with Windows, I just say to them, go to IT, and they get so confused because they're like, "You are IT." I'm like, "No, I'm a data engineer, very different." Anyway, just go over to those guys.
But no, to get us back to our topic at hand, I think that as we start, the group said it's still very muffled. If you can hear each other. The difference between you is not too harsh. Okay, I think I just need to get a better microphone. I think that's the thing that's on the cards there, really.
I actually, speaking of tech, I actually tried to. I'm using just my own. I'm just using a laptop webcam, but since I've now started to get a bit of a devoted following, I thought, right, I need to professionalize this. So I bought myself a HD webcam, and it looks
Very
great.
nice.
But the only problem is it keeps auto focusing, and
Oh no.
I can't fix it. So I've essentially wasted about 60. I mean, I'll have to return it. I'll have to return it back, but I've essentially wasted £60 on this on this kit, this HD webcam that
Yeah.
is just not working for me. So right now it's acting as an ornament, and it's currently sitting right in front of me right now, just staring
Well,
at me.
yeah. Well, I've
Mocking
unplugged
me.
this. I've unplugged this one now. I'm going to try using the laptop speakers just for this one, and we'll hopefully that gives me a bit more volume, so I'm not too distorted or muffled. But no, to finally come on to our topic at hand.
It wouldn't be a live stream if there isn't technical issues.
Exactly. There was a lot there which I would largely agree with, to be honest. The pragmatism, the wanting to fight against the forces of fascism, the reform are the obvious ones, but also the Tories, because they have done untold damage to the country, and also clearly have taken even further lurches to the right. I mean, I know Kemi Badenoch's a bit of a joke, but she is also the leader of the Tory party, saying pretty awful things quite regularly. So in my mind, I share a lot of that sentiment of, okay, we need to organise as a collective and realise, okay, there's more people who want justice and sort of left-wing ideals and a fair society for all than not, but we're spread over more parties, and we're sort of not all in the same places. So we've got to try and work together and keep as many seats not blue and not cyan as possible. But I think there's also, and I suppose this might be where our, not contention, but our difference might be. In my mind, there's a need to look at the material conditions of society as it exists at the moment and say, okay, how are we going to not only beat the fascists, but take some steps to ensure these guys have a much worse case to argue next time? How are we going to make it so that the far right do not have the same, not even convincing arguments, but the sort of the tools to power being harder for them next time? Because like you and like your family, I'm also a little bit worried about the prospect of Nigel Farage being prime minister and all the horrible things that he believes in and his ideologues believe in and such. And one of those ways is just voting reform, right? Like if we have an actual functioning democratic system, we're going to have a better chance of our actual views being represented. We're not going to have to rely on tactical voting, because the fact that most people don't like those parties on the far right will be reflected in the actual election results. But there's also that clear need to be critical of many of the things that exist in politics, which have been overwhelmingly right-wing and have dragged the centre, I say the centre, but have dragged the Labour Party so much further right. And one of those things, you mentioned Shabana Mahmood a second ago, and you touched on it quite well, the fact that the Labour Party believe there's this right-wing voter that's going to be convinced by their appeals to fascist-like ideas and such, be it on trans lives, be it on immigration, even just on the sort of iconography, right? Like the fact that Starmer likes to play up this, I'm the real patriot, I'm going to stand with these flags all everywhere, I'm gonna try and wear the colours of nationalism but somehow still be progressive. And it's really frustrating, because clearly anyone who is progressive is going to think, well, the Green Party are right there. Why am I voting for you anymore if you're going to sort of not even do the things that you promised and act in this manner? And the right wing people are thinking, okay, well, we've got reform right here. We've got Kemi Badenoch right here. Why do we need the Diet Coke when we've got full Coca-Cola just along the alley? So there's loads to talk about, but one of the things that I think is really frustrating is that there's not enough of a recognition that actually your base is the vast majority of people who have progressive ideals and aren't convinced by trying to play both sides.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Like, I think at the moment we are seeing a seismic change in politics. And I can see the Greens in the latest polls are 21%. So they've benefited from the Gaunton and Denton by-election. And I suppose what frustrates me as a kind of centre-left progressive is Labour clearly not. Now, I'm going to sort of backtrack a little bit, because I do think Labour have got things they can claim as achievements, like the Renters' Rights Bill and the Workers' Rights Bill. But it's just been completely overshadowed by things that is not part of Labour brand. So when they tried to change the PIPs, personal independent payments, it doesn't matter if it needs to be done. The fact that it's not Labour brand, you not expect a Labour Party to be doing that. You know, it upsets people on the left and sort of progressive politics. And then they did and then they also did the winter fuel payments. Now, I actually think, in principle, it was right to means test it. You know, it did not make sense that King Charles would get a £200 payment. He doesn't need the money. He doesn't need to have that £200 winter fuel payment. But the way they did it was such a massive cock-up. And if the civil service recommends you doing something, it probably is right. But you have to remember the politics, because often what the civil service will say impacts the politics. There's a lot of things that the civil service would want you to do, but it wouldn't be politically popular. So that also impacted the brand, and obviously immigration as well, which is impacting the Labour brand as well. So for me as a Liberal Democrat, it kind of frustrates me that we've got this party that's clearly abandoned the left, but also really unsettling the progressive, you know, people who might be socially liberal. Maybe they're kind of in the centre on economics, so socially liberal, but centrist on economics, possibly even, I dare say, Blairites. But they still felt abandoned because Labour's betrayed them on things like immigration, on protesting laws. Because I mean, legally, I don't think I can even say the name of the group, but the one that they banned over here, which goes against this sort of civic judicial values, civil liberties.
No, exactly.
And yet we aren't capitalising on that.
That's that real. Yeah, sorry, I cut you off, Ben.
No. So it's just there's just a lot to unpack here. But yeah, so I think this is where I think, and it's like yesterday, it's like a few days ago, Ed Davey, he talked about tax exiles, and he got a little bit of hot water on that. We're saying people in Dubai, well, if we're going to charter them from flights, then maybe they should start paying tax. Now, I think that was actually because when you think of Ed Davey, you think he's quite milquetoast. He's quite milquetoast. He's the lovable uncle, but harmless. And I, for one, thought this was actually quite bold of Ed Davey. And I quite enjoyed that, because I think really I think the Lib Dems we both need to be an answer for people who feel politically homeless on the moderate end of politics. But also, we do need to challenge institutions and orthodoxy. And I think no matter what, if you live in a country, and you've done that deliberately, because I think, so the reason he's upset some people is that, oh, this sounds really inhumane. You know, you're saying, you know, get your checkbook out before we can take you on a flight, and there's people on holiday. I think that's fair criticism. But I think what he was trying to do, he was trying to separate it with Richard Tice's wife. Richard Tice has made a career talking down our country and saying how rubbish it is, and a free speech absolutist. And yet she lives in a country where if you criticise the government, you can get a £10,000 equivalent of £10,000 fine, possibly even imprisonment. To which she said to that, I'm okay with that. So I think it was a bit unfair that people were trying to say, oh, he sounds really insensitive. How insensitive, Ed Davey. I think he probably should have softened the language a little bit. But I think what he was trying to do is say, look, there's an injustice here, pointing at the injustice and saying that's wrong. So I don't know if Ed Davey will benefit from this, because it seems to have got mixed response. But I thought it was well needed to be. It needs to be discussed. Probably not not a good timing, not good timing. But
no, I think that. Sorry to cut you off a little bit, Ben. Loads of really great things to bounce off on. So I think that I actually think that it's definitely about time there's more scrutiny placed on the fact that people who openly declare themselves to be in the far right and want to be these, we're going to save the country, we're patriots and such, should be addressed. The comments should be focused and scrutinised. Yes, if you live in another country and you can't make all these lies and false statements about the UK, and then actually when it turns out that, hey, maybe it's not so bad being in Britain as opposed to other parts of the world, you then get called out for that. Yeah, you should face some scrutiny. And I think it definitely, whilst because we in an ideal world, this, like, our conversations now would be how we'd sort out world issues, right? Like we'd sit down and we'd have a chat and work out what the solution is. But yeah, unfortunately, we live in a world with people who are fascists, who would actively shut down sensible conversation and want the world to turn into like a GB News hate hour where they just scream and shout and then go and, I don't know, turn the country into a cesspit with their horrid policies and such. And so there's got to be, in my mind, this recognition that there's not the sensible debate argument. They say, we're just saying stuff, we're just we're only interested in talking about the issues. We've got to recognise this isn't quite the truth, and recognise these people aren't here for a serious conversation. They're fascists, and they want to ultimately smash up the country's civil processes and human rights and such to make a quick buck, basically. And that brings us back a little bit to Labour, so to rewind sort of through what you're saying, and Ed Davey and such. I think that you're quite right to want Ed Davey to have this stronger approach, almost, like, not stronger, that's the wrong word, this more direct, where he said, yeah, okay, if you want to come back, then maybe start paying tax, and then perhaps we'll be more accommodating to getting you out of a war zone and such. And it's like, yeah, absolutely, but it's been lacking for so long, I think, because we have this idea almost, and it's definitely in the current Labour government, that there has to be this, we can't be too left-wing, we've got to be somewhere in the middle, and we've got to be trying to govern for everyone, without thinking that actually, okay, there has to be a line drawn somewhere. There's got to be, okay, here are our principles, like you said, we represent Labour, the workers, or Renzi certainly, so we should be thinking of policies which actively benefit people in the country, not trying to squeeze as much money out of every single facet of government and sort of almost managing it like a business instead of an actual, okay, we're the government and we need to govern for everyone and provide for people in the country. And then that takes us, I suppose, even further into my own sort of school of thought, which is that ultimately a lot of people in not just Labour, but I sort of think, like you were saying with the Lib Dems being sort of this voice to the Conservatives and the coalition earlier, right? Like the fact that they're there and they're trying to exist as a not de-radicalising, but like a counterbalance, right? The Conservatives have a more right-wing view, and they're trying to weigh down some of that and try and sort of tip the scale a bit more to the centre. And in my mind, that is something which almost, like, is great. Pragmatically, it was better having a coalition government than an overt Conservative government, because, as we saw, the years following 2015 were quite bad, and many terrible things happened, which I think, in fairness, the lack of a counterbalance definitely worsened. But equally, the direction of the country almost since Thatcher, basically, since the neoliberal turn and the sort of turn to more individualistic business mindsets and such, has taken us so far away from left-wing principles and the ideas of everyone being important and such, that it's now really hard to almost get a politician to say overtly, yeah, there's a real problem with what's happening in these spaces, and we've got to take quite a direct anti-right-wing approach almost. And I'll let you come in because I feel like I'm sort of saying a little bit.
Those are some really interesting points. So it'd be no surprise to you that in terms of I always say I'm on the left of the Lib Dems, which take that as what you will. I used to be a Marxist, so I read Marx, and I always challenge right-wing people to say, if they hate Marx that much, have you read it? A lot of them not read it. At least I've moved away from sort of Marxist doctrine, but at least I read the Das Kapital and the Communist Manifesto. So at least I actually read the source material. A lot of them don't. So a lot of them are being very disingenuous and so tunnel visioned on their view. I do agree that in terms of the legacy of Thatcherism, there has been this shift of I think it's important to have individualism because that forms my philosophy. But in terms of identity politics, I think it's very important. So I believe in terms of social issues, you should have the freedom, like, for example, trans rights. I think they should have complete liberties. I've got no problem with them having same spaces. It doesn't bother me at all. And I can't get my head around it. When it comes to I'm not a free speech absolutist because I think there has to be responsibility. I would not want anyone to say freely, let's burn down all, blah, blah, blah. That's not free speech. That's just hate speech to me.
Well,
but I do believe
I've always thought with free speech, if someone says, I'm going to do something which is going to cancel your free speech, as in take away your rights and such, that is an attack on free speech itself. Stopping the person that's the threat is a protection of people's free speech, right? So there's no, in my mind, there's no contradiction.
Well, actually, you've probably answered what I was going to say. I've always believed, the freedom ofs have to come with the freedom froms. So I believe in freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, in quotation marks. But I also believe there has to be a responsibility of the freedom from poverty, freedom from social injustice. And this is where a lot of people always think that's a contradiction of liberalism. I'm like, no, I'm not a neoliberal. I'm not a do what you want. I always say to people, because there are people called the Orange. So there was the Orange Book Club, who were basically the Nick Cleggs. They were on the right of the Lib Dems. And there's this fringe group called Liberal Reform. Again, this is a little bit of internal party fractions. I always say to them, we are the Liberal Democrats, not the Libertarian Democrats. We were the ones under Lloyd George that under Gladstone, actually, who legalised trade unions. Gladstonian liberalism. Anyone that is interested in politics have heard of Gladstonian liberalism. It's like, the state should do very little. It should only function for security and defence, but the state should be very hands-off, sort of Adam Smith philosophy. But he legalised trade unions. And I think a lot of people forget about Gladstone. So even he had a lot of complexity and colour. And I think when it comes to the idea of, I'm not about sort of smashing up capitalism, but I do think there are some things that should be separate from the private sector and the state. Like, for example, would I want us to nationalise the O2 arena? No. Because why? Why would you want to nationalise that? It's a place where people go for gigs to see Taylor Swift. No, I wouldn't want that to be nationalised. But I don't think we should be having private companies in the National Health Service. I think that's where I think there has to be a separation between the market, sort of market, and the state. And I've always liked what Joe Grimman used to say, who was a Liberal leader. You know, we should be against private monopolies, state monopolies. And I think what the Labour government of 1945 did not do right is that they didn't empower the workers when they nationalised those companies. Instead, they empowered pen pushers and bureaucrats, which is why with the coal mining, I mean, in some ways, I'm glad we don't use coal because it's not good for the environment, but still, the reason why the coal, there was so much friction with the coal boards and the miners is because they didn't have control of the industry. It was a bunch of white middle-class men who thought, well, we know better. So, no, you're not going to get this pay rise, even though in 1970s, Edward Heath did a commission because he wanted to prove a point. He did a commission on whether they should get a pay rise. And it turned out the commission said, actually, they should get a pay rise. In fact, they should get a massive pay rise. So he ended up getting egg on his face, even though he did this commission to deliberately, you know, use facts to try and avoid it. But no, I think, but where coming back on sort of my pluralism, because I think there's a good point there that you make. I think sadly, because of our electoral system, our first past the post, I think we are going to have an uneasy sort of arrangement, an uneasy cooperation between, certainly I think for the Lib Dems and for the Greens, because there's a real question of like, because you mentioned the Tories as well, because there's a real question of whether you can include Labour as that. You know, yeah.
Yeah, this is, I think, the contention, right? Because we've got my inner radical was tingling a little bit. So if you just said then, my inner sort of belief in perhaps some more left-wing stuff. But we'll park it for a second because I absolutely agree. Like, there's definitely pragmatically, if we're living in if we are thinking strictly about what is happening in 2026, not 2025, I'm losing track of time, right now, absolutely there should be, you know, the immediate protection of critical services to the UK. But this is, I think, one of the things which is important to stress, and what you're sort of touching on here, right? The fact that, unfortunately, in Labour and ultimately in the Lib Dem, and to an extent in Greens as well, there's that almost fear of doing the necessary thing to protect those services, which are ultimately quite left-wing actions, saying, okay, privatisation has crept its way into healthcare, is creeping into other public services, and as a result, millions of people have unequal access to things which should be human rights. So the way of reversing that is nationalising them, but also taking the financial power out of the hands of the corporations which dominate these industries, which involves inevitably taxing them, taking assets that they own off them and returning them back to public ownership, which, as you've just sort of said there, right, like it's not the case that when something is publicly owned now that we've got sort of democratic control truly, because it's like mediated through various institutions, right? Like when we say our healthcare is publicly owned, it's not as though you and I have like direct democratic control. We're people who vote for parties that then delegate people from governments to organise it and such. So one of the sort of core left-wing critiques, which I think is missed a lot, is that when we say we want things nationalised and sort of worker-owned and such, we're not like advocating for some like Soviet Union type scenario where like the commission has appointed some state official who blatantly has his hand in the
state politburo.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we're not advocating for that. We want a genuine restructuring so that democracy is really invested into every process of the management of a country, and then people like academic experts and people on the ground and people who are actively involved in the day-to-day of the organization are involved in decision making, so that we're not seeing like the fulcrum of hospital organisation being how much can we charge people to park in the parking spaces, or which vending machine will we put in our reception area, Pepsi or Coke. Like, it's going to be things like actually getting the public interest invested into the day-to-day organisations. But that requires such a break from the the neoliberal model of, okay, well, the market can step in and solve all of this, and if we just empower corporations to boost their involvement, we'll get more growth and our GDP will go up, and all this sort of economic right-wing jargon which doesn't really serve the day-to-day lives of people.
Yeah, I mean, I think well, it used to be tenets of the Liberal Party, the idea of co-ownership, cooperation. In fact, it's not uncommon in some European countries. Germany, they have unions who represented on the boards, and they get a stake in the company. And that, for me, that used to be a basic tenet of liberalism during the times of in the sort of 60s and 70s. It was like conservatives, it was all about the business. Labour, it's all about the state and the unions. The Liberals actually had this very comfortable space. They said, well, why can't it be co-determinism? Why can't workers just have a stake in the business? Because if they've got a stake and some kind of say in the industries, then in their argument, because this was during the times when there was a lot of pay disputes, inflation was running high, and their argument was, the Liberal Party back then, well, actually, if the workers had a stake and a say and looked at the accounts, then not only would they be benefiting from that, but they'd probably be a lot more reasonable. They'd be a lot more reasonable if they actually go, well, actually, oh, okay, we'll take a 6% pay rise, but stock owners won't get a bonus this year, whatever. So yeah. I think that's how politics should be, because I think if you just sit down and have these conversations, you actually begin to realise that people can be a lot more reasonable than we imagined. And,
completely agree. And there's definitely that, I agree with that, definitely. There's definitely that human element, which if people actually sit down and have the opportunity to converse and such, there's that sense of, okay, what is in the mutual good? We can take a little bit for ourselves, but we also have that incentive and rationale to think about wider society. But where that's lost almost is, again, ultimately, to bring it back to that Thatcherite turn of sorts, the idea that the market is the solution, and the sort of corporate financial incentives which then pollute this experience, right? Because where we have the capitalist mode of organising, the profit incentive overhangs everything, even the bits we separate, because it's our way of doing things, right? It's our system. And so where we are able to sit down and say, yeah, this is something we should be protecting and maintaining for the social good, like our healthcare, our roads, our trains, etc. Some other corporation, be it in the UK or overseas, looks at it and thinks, there's a nice business opportunity here. And even if they aren't, because we often imagine like the sort of person doing this to be like some Elon Musk evil cartoon villain character. It's just like, yeah, we're gonna just turn people into slaves and have sacks of money on our shoulders every minute. But even if we remove that sort of characterization, the financial incentive to squeeze the pennies out of a situation is still there. And so that, I think, explains why say someone like Tony Blair, who I agree, right? Like, there are clearly things which the Labour government from 97 to 2010 did which benefit the country, right? Like, there's so many things you can point to, but they're watered down and lost the long-term effect because they don't reverse fully the right-wing turn that Thatcher started, and in fact continue it in many ways. And so because of that, you then had the next government coming in after, the coalition government, beginning austerity and beginning the turn of real sort of neoliberal conservative right-wing fiscal approaches, and then the government after that doing that even more, and it just snowballing until we get to this state now where the Labour government have not only inherited a mess from years of Tory austerity and privatisation, but are reluctant to even do the necessary steps about it. Because as you said earlier, right, like they do, Starmer's government have tried to do things like the right to rent and such, right? Like the renters' rights.
Well, I would argue they have, because I've never seen a government. And also, we talked about nationalisation. They are nationalising the railways, and they've nationalised steel. And I think this is where I get a bit this is where I often get a little bit. I mean, I've got my criticisms of Labour, but my criticisms tend to be on issues like immigration, trans rights, an economy that appears to just be stalling at the moment. But when I speak to some people on the left and they say, "Oh, they're not nationalising anything," I'm like, do you not read the papers? Do you not watch the news? They are. They're nationalising rail and they're nationalising steel. And I think it might not be the most left-wing Labour government that they want, but for me, it's certainly been, for my dad, it's certainly been the most left-wing Labour government since the 1970s. And I think that's where the tribalism comes in and the sort of the ugly nature of politics. And again, I think this is where I think I think for people like I was saying, that I heard the other day about a union said Labour need to go more left wing, and it's like, well, workers' rights, renters' rights. I think it's just wrong to not sort of characterise them in that way. I think they're right, and probably on immigration, assuming if that's what the unions are calling on about. But I think I do have a level of sympathy in some ways for Keir Starmer, not a huge amount, but a little bit, because I think it's not factually correct to say they've not done anything that's considered left wing. And even when they've tried with the farmers' tax, they had to then derail it because the powerful lobbyists. Because the thing is, there's always a powerful lobby for landowners and for the wealthy, but where's the powerful lobby for the people who are the most marginalised in society?
Yeah.
Where
like
are their
this,
lobby?
I think this speaks to. Yeah, no, I agree. Like, there's that. There is an element of perspective, like you were saying earlier. Like, the right wing media are never going to report on all the things that Labour have done, and so they're going to overwhelmingly focus on immigrants are taking over, whatever. Like, the fake, obviously nationalistic, racist stories, which then make Labour or inspire Labour to then double down on terrible policies. But I would stress that there's a difference between a left-wing policy and a step leftwards from previous policies. Because whilst it's absolutely true that the presence of lobbies and such, and the existence of wealth is always going to make it tricky to push through left-wing stuff in any society, right? There's also clearly a responsibility for a party that says it represents workers to have a bit more backbone and spine and say, okay, well, yes, we're going to naturally face this pressure and we need to even still do more. But through Starmer's choices and the party's internal conflicts to drive out many of the people they saw as being too left-wing and ultimately cling to much of the more neoliberal elements of it, they've lost much of the momentum that might have taken them further on some of the issues that you mentioned, and additionally have meant that they are tethered to many of the corporate elements that see them have to drop policies which might have made the changes they need to. I also think as well that one of the problems that they do have, which is a little bit tricky because it's not one that you can almost fix, like, snap your fingers, is the nature of living in a society that's been hollowed out by austerity for decades, is that if you, without radical changes, which then get portrayed as like open communism or whatever, like, it's hard to if you tether yourself to growth and economic expansion and such, then it's going to be tricky to do that in a landscape that has largely deprived the state of the assets they need to have direct control, right? You're tethered to, like, Amazon being more successful in your country and such, and investors feeling like they can spend money in your country, which then is trickier if you're in a certain situation. So I think that even with this issue, like, they need to ultimately take the step left, and that is going to be tricky and hard, but they can't do that if they're still tethered to this idea that, we've got to let the market decide, which even whilst they do sometimes step left away from the conservatives in some areas, like, there's still too much of a tendency to, as we said earlier, play both sides and try and be the middleman, and ultimately end up getting dragged, they wouldn't have the issue of people only seeing them as being this complete fascist, regressive party if they didn't do the things which led people to believe that, i.e., the constant buckling to Farage on immigration issues and the obsession with the anti-trans stuff, which is really alarming, because this is not only like it's not just buckling to a right-wing perspective on things. It's also like just a blatant violation of people's human rights, which is really scary. And I think there's
it comes back to the brand issue. It comes back to the brand issue.
But it's almost more than like branding though, because it's like people like there's always going to be an element of left-wing people or people on the left of things struggling to have an image, right? Because you don't have the media empire working to sell it for you. Like, if to use an American analogy, like Trump is a billionaire who owns skyscrapers, so of course it's easier for him to pump money into an organization and get favorable coverage than the local upstart who's trying to represent people. But this issue is one which is directly about human rights. Like, ultimately, trans people, as with any person, just want to be able to access healthcare and such. So, like, the fact that there's...
I get angry when Labour, or I always feel Labour do use LGBT as a political football. And I really mean that, because they only seem to want to talk about LGBT rights when it's politically convenient. It's a bit like civil liberties. We talked about. I mean, I touched on the fact that they are banning they're banning certain protests and using terrorism laws to prevent people from doing peaceful protest. And we've seen the images of old ladies being hustled into police vans who all they're doing is holding a sign and not saying anything, no confrontation. And it frustrates me that Labour claim to be, or we are the civil liberties party. No, Labour have always instinctively been authoritarian. It's always been that way for a long time. And I think a lot of people are doing Mandela effects and thinking, oh, well, Labour has traditionally been this party of civil liberties. No, it hasn't. And it's the same when they do LGBT rights. It's not naturally a party of LGBT rights. I mean, if you look at old manifestos, it was the Liberals and the Alliance that was calling it. They were saying things in the 80s that would during the AIDS epidemic, which would be considered a political risk. They were saying we need to have an equality rights bill, which included sexual orientation and gender identity in the 80s. And Labour just liked to borrow those clothes because by the 90s it was politically convenient. So, but I do agree. I agree with what you said on all of that. You know, when it comes to things like trans rights, it's not natural. It shouldn't. It seems unnatural for Labour to be frustrating this conversation, especially when Keir Starmer used that poor girl's the mother of that poor girl who died, and condemned Rishi Sunak in the Commons for what he said at conference, saying, you know, men are men, women are women. And I don't know how the mother must feel, because I would feel pretty used if I was that mum, because he did use her. And that's what Labour do. Labour like to use people as props. And that's what makes me quite angry. And that's what makes me angry generally about politics, really.
I feel like with the LGBTQ stuff, it's the case that because we're in a society which has had a very long history of bigotry and discrimination and such, you've got when organisations are formed, especially in the early 20th century, you've got people writing saying they represent Labour and workers and such, but also internalise those bigoted views. It's like the same with anti-racism, right? Like, you've got people in that party who will on the one hand say, yeah, we want everyone to have an education and a home and such, and then be like, oh, well, we can't let too many immigrants in because you don't want the neighbourhood turning less white. And then it's like, you clearly, that betrays the idea of representing all, but because we live in a society which has those bigoted elements as sort of undercurrents that are seeming natural, you get comments like that make their way into policy and such. I do think to offer some defence of Labour, like, because they are a party.
I was going to say, I felt like my heart nearly leapt out when I was defending Labour, but so.
But like, obviously, as a party that has traditionally been the one of lower economic groups and such, and because it encompasses those social rights, you have seen more people pro LGBTQ eventually like in that party. And I suppose as well, like it's worth stressing that whilst it's absolutely true for what you say that people in that party would have been bigoted and such in the 80s and such before the political I hate the term politically correct, but like as you say, like the idea that when society became less bigoted towards LGBTQ people will have latched onto it and say, yeah, we want this as a political win. But it's worth stressing that a lot of activism did happen within the party to push for equal recognition. I don't think it's the case that everyone in Labour only sort of cynically adopted
I was
gay
probably
rights.
being quite unfair to Labour, because even when the Alliance and the Liberals might have been spearheading in terms of policy, in terms of representation, Labour was ahead in terms of actually having LGBT representatives. I mean, even now in the Lib Dems, we claim to be, we're a very diverse party. And we're not really. We're still quite white, definitely middle class. We have got a lot more women now in the party, thankfully, but it's mainly been white men who are middle class. So Labour, at least on a surface level, Labour do actually do a lot to get representation through their parliamentary MPs. But then that makes it all the more depressing when you've got Wes Streeting, who is a gay man, who basically is the health secretary saying, no, the Supreme Court is correct. And it just goes to show how fragile the LGBT coalition is. I've literally lost friends because they are anti-trans rights. And I think to them, it was trans women in Stonewall that give you your rights.
Exactly.
It upset me that I had to leave them as friends, but they exist. They do exist, sadly.
No, well, I've heard it myself. It's people who have concerns or whatever, and it's like there's no critical thought applied to the fact that the concerns you're talking about are the same concerns that they had about everyone in the LGBTQ, and rolling further back, it's the same. Black people face all the same.
Think of the children.
It's the same dog whistles.
Yeah,
exactly. It's the same nonsense. But I think the critical juncture that I would say is important here is sort of almost go beyond just the because it is bigotry, right? But it's intersectional bigotry that comes from a right-wing place of divide and conquer and of trying to get that social control, right? Because when in America, the money that we. Again, to look at America, they've pumped so much money into anti-trans stuff, adverts, campaigns, all the silly interventions into schools and such to try and keep the gay away from children, whatever. Like all the money they spend on it, and then some of that has then made its way to the UK, where we're now unfortunately seeing the same anti-trans arguments trying to sprout up, and arguably have sprouted up because look at the Labour Party, look what a Labour government has said and done about trans rights, like really bad. But that comes ultimately because a lot of people in the right-wing space see LGBTQ issues as either an unnecessary expenditure to save government money on spending on, see it as something to exploit, to that bigotry element of, okay, well, if we can't win people over with our obvious want to be economically powerful over everyone else, we're going to try and create that division. There's some other in society and the other is going to change our way of life and therefore you've got to oppose it. And then as with racism, sexism, anything, this then becomes a tool of power and control. But also just a clear example of money being in politics, right? Like they get these groups so much money from American conservative think tanks to then spread these disgusting anti-LGBTQ ideas. And because the money is just there and no one's doing anything to try and stop it, it's just allowed to fester. Like if there was, and this is another thing which really has to be stressed, like if we want that left-wing change, if we want human rights to be truly valued for everyone, regardless of who we are, we've got to be able to say, okay, you are not allowed to give millions to an anti-human rights cause in fact, you're not allowed to give a million to any cause because it's silly. You can't have a democracy where someone can just spend thousands more than someone else to try and get their message across. Like it's a clear contradiction there. So, in my mind, like whilst it's important in my mind to identify that Labour have all these really ugly characters in their party at the moment, it's also worth recognising that they still exist in Tories, Reform, even. I mean, there are fewer the further left you go because naturally, if you're challenging power, you're not going to be quite as attracting the moneyed element of it. But in order to address them and to stop the issue from happening in the first place, we've got to get that money out of politics, and that requires a proper step to the left, which I think Labour need to be held to the fire for, and if not, then replace the other parties.
It can be achieved. It can be achieved now. In Australia, you get based on the state. Basically, the state pays for election campaign, and it's based on how many votes you get. So if you do well, you get X amount of money. Now, I think there is some donations to a degree, but they have like limits. But I mean, the thing is, the Liberal Democrats, we often say we don't get our money from unions or millionaires because, again, very clever wordplay. It's like unions, oh, that's Labour, millionaires, that's the Tories. But that's probably not being very truthful, really, because we do get some donations from people who are quite. I mean, the person that was the CEO of Sainsbury's, I think he regularly donates about £1 million a year, which again, silly money, but I'm sure we're very grateful for it because I'm pretty sure if we just did it on membership alone, we'd probably end up not doing. We'd be not doing, and we'd probably be in the red, in all honesty. But I like the idea of a voucher. I think everyone should have a donation voucher where everyone you get a voucher of say £50, and it's completely voluntary, but you would be able to spend. Basically, that would be the spending cap. So you get a voucher, you can spend £50 or whatever to a political party. I think because I think money does need to come out of politics because sadly, even the Labour Party, I think they've had to, in order, because for them to have done so well, they needed to court people who are the rich financiers in order to fund their campaign.
That's the nature of a system, right? Like you need the money to get through.
Yeah,
and
obviously that becomes a transaction then. Like no one seriously gives loads of money if they don't want some kind of influence in party policy.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think electoral and donation reforms are my two issues. I think those, like, it's quite tragic because I suppose we've gone quite off topic really, but this has been, I'm enjoying it all the same. But it's going to be quite tragic because I think if Keir Starmer wanted to have a legacy, or whoever the future Labour leader is, because let's be real, he's probably not going to be here for another year, Keir Starmer. I think they should make proportional representation be their legacy, because if you're going to go, you might just go with a bang. You think, right, and if you're going to go, you might just try and prop up your party as much as you can, because it's going to be, because this next election, you are going to have people who are going to have to vote really tactically, and there are going to be some people, particularly who are very, very tribal in their politics, or very passionate about, or very passionately against a political party, or very passionately for a political party, who are going to have to end up voting for the worst evil. And that's what's really sad about it, because I think people should vote on who you support. It's like my area here. I'm not going to, I'm a Lib Dem member, but I've made it quite clear that in 2029, if it looks like it's going to be a very tight contest, I will resign my membership so I can encourage people to vote tactically, because I know I will be. But the question will be, is it going to have to be Labour? Now, that's quite sad, because there's a lot of things I don't like.
For all the things we've been saying here, right? Like, I think that what you just said there people should vote for what they, in an ideal system, we'd vote for what we believe in, and ultimately most people believe in things which are progressive and to the left of where we are now. Right? Like I don't think anyone seriously chooses. I don't think anyone would seriously choose. Dentistry is going to cost you too much per appointment, so just stick to not seeing one ever again once you reach 18 or whatever. Like, or train lines taking too long to operate, or all the other stuff. Schools not receiving enough money to fund teaching assistants.
If you want a strawberry ice cream, you don't go, "Oh, I'm going to have chocolate then." Like, you should have that choice. And I think I suppose that really cements my philosophy, the idea of choice. I think it's quite a dirty word, choice, because choice, you think free market, whatever. But I think choice can be reclaimed.
Absolutely, it's anything with the market. It's a co-option of the term, right? It's like the free market. The freedom isn't truly for the people. It's for whoever has capital to set up the market in their way. Like, it's a false choice, because inevitably when you get to the market, you've got it's like if you want to buy strawberry ice cream and then you go into the shop and you're choosing between one of a few mega corporations that have managed to muster up control of the industry and such.
Well, actually, monopolies. I think we should be breaking monopolies. Even though I said earlier, I think there should be a separation between the state and the private sector. I still believe a private sector should evolve itself. I just think it's separate between public services. But even then, I'm recognising that I don't want to overthrow capitalism. What I don't like is unfairness. And right now, we have very big private monopolies. And I'm a great believer that we should break those private monopolies so we can give people because I'm not against people having aspirations. If people, like, for example, you could become a successful YouTuber and decide, I need to hire staff now. Now, I mean, I'm being very hyperbole. I'm being deliberately provocative. But you're not going to say, well, we're going to nationalise your YouTube channel because, you're a boss now. I know. I think it's fine. What we need is fairness. Like, I'm sure you'd be the same. If we ever became super successful, I'd like to think we would make sure if we hired staff, we would make sure we paid them well. You might even want to do a cooperative. There's options there, but I'd like to think we'd pay them well. What I don't like to see is someone who feel like that gives, just because they made it themselves, they've been self-made, that gives them an entitlement to treat others with little dignity and to make them and to sort of have to survive on wages that does not give them a decent standard of living.
I mean, I think that is an interest. Obviously I appreciate that your example is sort of just to illustrate a point more and such, and it is worth. I do, like, on a personal level. I feel like, of course, if we were in that position, we would like to be paying people a fair wage and such, right? But I think, firstly, that the critique we have of them. I mean, we're leaning into our sort of capitalist versus anti-capitalist stuff here for a moment, which I'm fine to go into at some point. But it's good
to have tension in these conversations.
Exactly.
Because
but I suppose it's the same theme as with the voting systems, right? Like, the idea that someone is self-made, I think, betrays the idea of being in society. Because, like, when I think of self-made, I imagine, like, Clark Kent crashing into Earth, and he was Kryptonian, so his power and his ability to fly around the world and such is coming from the fact he's Kryptonian. But that ignores the fact that without being raised by his parents and without his schooling and all the things that have gone into being able to become Clark Kent as well as Superman, mean that he's not self-made. He's someone's produced by society. So even someone like Superman, who is this basically indestructible titan from space, relies on the labor of others to become the good hero that he is. And so on a smaller scale, away from the fictional world of Superman, even someone that
Not
someone
Batman though, because he was definitely pro-capitalist.
Well, indeed, right? But I mean, even Batman, Alfred was quite a handy person for him. He's got a team,
True.
Robin and Batgirl and such show up, and Commissioner Gordon. But even the most self-made, like the idea of the rags to riches story, the person that starts out in their shed making something and then ends up buying a factory and they mass produce, millions of their, I don't know, their pencil sharpener. Say they've made the world's best pencil sharpener. You can sharpen your pencil 1,000,000 times with it. Even if they made their pencil sharpener and they came up with it all by themselves and they have all these innovations and such, they still rely on the labor of others all across the not just their like own industry but across the globe, and that is direct in terms of who actually produced the materials to, or cultivated the materials to get it, and abstract because like when you wake up and go into the shower and eat your breakfast and walk to work or whatever, like all of those processes needed things before you did that to realize it. And that means that when we think about industry on a larger scale, we should be thinking about everyone, and therefore through that we should be able to see everyone benefiting from the proceeds of society in a more equitable and equal way than what we've seen previously. And I think that equity, that sense that everyone should be able to have a democratic say in society, is something that we would largely agree with. Like, no, as we've just said here, like even if we suddenly found ourselves with 1,000,000 subscribers and wanted to mass produce videos and maybe needed an editing team and such, like no one's saying that we would exploit them inherently, right? Like, of course, you want to pay them a fair wage and such, but I almost feel like it's not quite analogous because whilst an editing team, there's some like personal sort of relation. You're probably directly talking to them. You're probably trying to, think about like how you can make it and such. The real process that we're trying to sort of zoom in on is the wider stuff around that, like outside of the digital space, which is still important to make equal and equitable and such. Like obviously there's hundreds of cases of people basically working for free almost for some tech giant.
Gaming industries, particularly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's horrific. It's horrendous.
I mean,
like,
that's just slavery in my eyes.
100%. I mean, Crunch, what they call developers who are basically living at their offices, all the layoffs that's happening. The fact that, the fact that EA can make billions and then they're shutting down all these little game studios that they've bought up basically to kill off competition. Like so many poor ethics. And so when we're critiquing the structures, we're sort of saying, is it right that in the pursuit of profit, all of this has taken place? Because ultimately that is why this happens. Like very few people wake up and think, yeah, I'm going to ruin that guy's life today. It's more that they've been led to economic decisions which have negative effects for lots of people because it benefits their status, their power, their capital. And so to extrapolate this to our elections, our democratic processes, it's absolutely right that we'd want to have proportional representation and have an actual sense of what people would want to have in society. But in the same way that the corporation sacks 1,000 workers so they can keep their revenue uninterrupted, the economic capital of political parties is converted into political measures like keeping a bad voting system, like maintaining donations to massive degrees, accepting the influence and money of billionaires, keeping a shocking media infrastructure which basically exists to promote the politics of one or two ideologies and nothing left wing. Like all of this is done for the same economic reasons. And so what I think, as well as working together and sort of tying us back into our central theme, right, as well as being a team against fascism on the various strands of the left, it's also a sense of, okay, we now need to be quite firm in saying if we're going to improve things and really beat these guys, we're going to have to take a step away from the right-wing stuff we've been flirting with for quite some time. And that's going to mean saying to people like Labour, yeah, if Starmer, you've done a few good things, but it's time to go left now or go home because we've got fascists at the door, one election away from taking control of the country.
Well, I don't think it needs that really, because I think in terms of the Greens, I think they're now occupying that space, and I think it might be a case for Labour now a bit too little, too late. I mean, my dad really really sort of feels this because he's a Labour man, Labour voter. He's a socialist, and he's obviously Labour was built by the unions, so it's quite sad for him to see Labour become like this. But I definitely agree that in terms of what I hope what could be achieved in this election is that this could be the last election we use first past the post, because right now it's just not working. We're potentially going to see Reform win on less than 30% of get a majority on less than 30% of the votes,
which
and
is
that's
hideous,
just not right.
Yeah.
And if you do the maths, I mean, it would be a very, if you do the maths, it would be a very awkward coalition. But about 52 to 54% would vote for progressives. So that would be Greens, Labour, Lib Dems, and the Nationalist Party. Now, it looks like a hot mess when you look at the seats, because you think, oh my word, it's going to be nearly basically be split into threes. It'd be like third Lib Dems, third of Lib Dems in this coalition, a third Greens, a third Labour. Whether that would practically work would be another matter. But I think it's still important, because I think we can't. Again, it's difficult. It's difficult because, if you're going to have people in all parties who will just say we flat out will not want to work with another party. But I think this election, it's a real threat. It's a real threat in terms of the Reform vote, and well, even Kenny Badenoch. I mean, God, if it's between the two, I'd rather not have either. But God, at least the Conservatives, you'd hope there'd be some moderate Tories who might try and persuade Kemi, if she was in government, actually. It's like
which limb would you like cut off, isn't it? It's the sort of like
this is the thing. This is the problem for the Lib Dems. We are basically because we did so well in the former Tory seats. One of the criticisms that Ed has had is that we're trying to talk left but look conservative, one might say.
Yeah.
So he's often talked about the, like, for example, the language is quite important, because he talked about the banned, the legal action that was taken, like the protest to do with the protest group being banned. It was quite telling, really, because he says, this is because it was when they won a court action against the government. And Ned Davies said, this is why Labour needs to drop the prescribement of this group to stop wasting taxpayers' money. And I just thought, right, so that's an interesting pivot. Like, I would have approached it on just the principles of civil liberties, but apparently he's decided to approach it on the principles of taxpayers' money. So, but anyway, I've really gone off topic. But yeah, I think you're right, and I just hope that this election, or even better than the election before, will be the last one we use first past the post. And especially in terms of, like, it's not just money, it's foreign money as well. Like, we're getting a lot of foreign money influencing parties. And I think that also needs, why we accept foreign donations, I don't know.
Capitalism, right? Economic. It's the because I know that because I what you just said there, I agree with, right? Like, there has to be that bustling through some of the difficulties we have between parties to try and keep these guys out, right? But at the same time, I'll come on to that in a second, actually. But yeah, like, foreign money, 100%. Like, American investment organizations looking at our public services and thinking, wow, there's a untapped potential to be exploited if we could just get a few people in government to make some business-friendly policies. Hence, Nigel Farage, who seemingly spends his time on a world tour of just various billionaire resorts and such, just trying to court more favors and more investors for his party and such, right? But as well as that cooperation, there's got to be also, a bit of there are some principles we need to agree on. And ultimately, I do think that they need to be, whilst sure, there's got to be flexibility and pragmatism. There's also got to be a case of, okay, well, you have, certainly with a Wes Streeting type, right? You've got to say, you are not going to be part of this if you haven't reneged on and atoned for all the anti-LGBTQ stuff you've done, all the overtures to privatisation and the NHS and such. And then almost take that a bit further, because I think whilst on the Greens, for instance, I have been really encouraged and pleased to see them being much more left-wing, and Zach Lansky's attempts to try and get the party being a bit more openly contentious and anti-fascist with their rhetoric and such. But they're one party, and they need to have that. If we're gonna see a proper coalition of sorts between the Greens and Lib Dems, and I mean Labour, I feel like there's a lot of people have left the Labour Party because the way they are at the moment, and I still think there's a lot of people who, from the sounds of it, like your father and people across the country, who vote Labour or would like to vote Labour because they feel like they're the best shot of winning a seat, right? Like the idea that
accurately is probably more anti-reform and anti-Tory than
exactly.
It's probably a more accurate description of my dad. Yeah,
exactly, right. But that signals to me that not only is there a lot of energy for anti-fascism and actually quite progressive stuff, like having funded public services and maybe not tearing up our human rights to satisfy Nigel Farage's racist friends or whatever, but also a commitment to actual left-wing values. I think that as well as being anti-fascism is something that's really important, but it also needs to be something which is anti-fascism is inherently support for life and value and the worthiness of human beings being together in society, and inevitably that is a left-wing thing. And so to reflect that, as well as just sort of doing the stuff that is reversing some of the austerity, is also got to be really bold steps forward. We want to have a democratic society because we believe everyone should have a say in how their lives are managed. So we therefore need to democratize our elections, which involve tackling some element of the market, because it's not even just the fact that you can donate loads, it's also the coverage being like a marketing game. Who can get the most viewers on their news channel, and so they dramatize the way the coverage is done. They publish really
they deliberately provocative.
Yeah, exactly.
And
the news.
I suspect a few of the anchors are not this in real life, are not this
absolutely
animated, let's say.
But that again requires us to tackle the market. That again says, okay, the news is something which is it should be like a fact-based thing. It should be as factual as going to a science book and looking up the number of hydrogen molecules in water, right? It should be as factual as a maths equation. The news should be something which is maybe not as factual as a maths equation, because it's a bit tricky to. Obviously, it's going to be an element of social leaning and such, but certainly in terms of how things are covered, it should be as neutral as you can try and make it, right? But inevitably, that neutral, if you report on, say, the happenings of austerity, inevitably you get to the section where it's wow, this school couldn't afford to keep the heating on because it ran out of money this term, or this hospital had to keep someone in a waiting room for a day because there weren't enough beds for treatment and such, and that inevitably reflects badly on right-wing policies. So when you get all these right-wing people saying, academia has a left-wing bias, and it's not a bias, it's just facts are more incorporated into a left-wing perspective because they are inevitably critical of the current reality we live in, where a lot of people aren't getting what they're needing from society. A lot of people aren't being treated properly, and I think that does sound a bit. It's a strong taste as it comes out of your mouth, right? There's a clear need to be left-wing, but in my mind, there has to be that step where we're going to take the necessary things we both want to happen, because we've tried, like you just said a second ago, right? Like talking left wing ideas, but having the appearance of conservatism. If we want that talk to manifest into something real, if we want to be seeing justice that we know is possible, there's got to be that firmer. We can't have appealing to the right, doing things that try and appeal to both sides. It's got to be, if we're not going to be left wing, then what are we doing but delaying the inevitable?
I think I think there's some truth to that. I think you have to give people hope, which is it's a very woolly thing to do, because I think a lot of people have been let down by in politics generally, and the sort of the institutions feel completely corrupted by sort of the flow of money and excess of power and the powerful.
Yeah.
I also think it has to be a slight balance as well in some ways, because I'll take one good example. Anna Salisbury, she used to be a Conservative MP. She then founded the Change UK party. If anyone can remember that, it was one of those, you'll blink and you'll miss it. But I saw her Twitter the other day. Now, she's clearly a centrist, but she condemned what Trump's been doing in America. She's called him a fascist, a warmonger. She called him a warmonger not long ago. And I was shocked, pleasantly shocked, because I thought, this same Anna Salisbury, the same one who I used to see on Question Time, who defended the austerity and stuff like that. So I don't know if she's had a political evolution. So I think there should be space where there are people who have evolving their politics. Because I think it's quite easy to sort of look at Anna Salisbury. You might say, oh, she's part of the Uni Party. She's centrist one and all that, But she clearly felt uncomfortable enough she clearly felt so uncomfortable being in that Conservative Party around the Brexit. And now she regularly comments how toxic and culture war baiting they've become.
Yeah.
So I think it has to invite that kind of space as well. It's a bit like, for example, like I'll set my cards on the table. So Zab Polanski's made a big deal about the wealth tax. Now, on a moral level, I agree with him. I think it is wrong that people who have got so much wealth and basically they use investments in stocks or their properties or land or whatever to not have a salaried, to avoid having a salaried job. Because the problem is we aren't, for example, the problem is we aren't taxing the top rate of tax more. I think the rate's actually fine. What is an injustice is that there are people who get their money through shares or dividends, Cayman Islands, whatever, who pay hardly any tax. They pay a smaller tax. I don't want to tax the top rate of tax more. I just want the ones who aren't paying tax or paying very little tax to pay their share. But on the wealth tax, it's not my moral objection. It's the practical objection. And I'm going to lay this very bluntly. They've tried it in France. It didn't work. It lost them money. They tried it in Spain. It didn't work. It lost them money. Norway, they tried it. They've now had an election where the Labour government of Norway, went in the election. They brought in the wealth tax. They went to the election saying, we're going to cut the wealth tax because it didn't work. And that is my problem, where I feel like, for me, it feels like a bit of a grift for me.
I mean,
because the evidence shows it does not work. However, we should have a land value tax. Why? Because you can't move a piece of land. You physically can't move it. So it takes away the issue of capital flight. It takes away people moving abroad. Land value tax is where that conversation should be. And this is where you get into the complexities of, like, for example, we talk about, there has to be, if there's going to be a transaction, I think it has to be a two-way street. Because if I was, say, for example, if I was a Lib Dem spokesperson doing a coalition deal, my first thing would be to Zach Walensky, ditch your wealth tax, have a land value tax. If he didn't budge on it, then I would say to him, I'm not doing it. Because that is just being dishonest to voters. And all you're going to do is have more people drifting towards reform. Because if you start having policies like the wealth tax and not finding a practical a tax that could actually work, and it's been used in Singapore, they have a land value tax in Singapore. It brought them loads of money. And because of that, they've introduced loads of council houses through that, like equivalent of a council house. So that's why there has to be, it's both finding hope, but also being pragmatic and realistic. Because the last thing I want for voters is to say, we're going to promise you gold, and then when it comes to it, you end up doing things like France and Spain and Norway, where you end up going, well, actually, it didn't bring us any money.
So I think that Rockaz in the chat, actually, and I'll start sifting through some of these comments, really sums up my thoughts on this quite a little bit. As we were saying earlier, left-wing ideas, or ideas to the left of what we exist, have to be filtered through societies which are capitalistic, have the market forces still in play, and are in neoliberal terms. Like, it's like when you read about like the Socialist Party in France, and then you see it's like Francois Hollande or someone like that, like who very much is not a socialist. There's that clear.
Francois Mitterrand in the 1980s, and he introduced a wealth tax, and it didn't work.
That's
he rolled back. He actually abolished it. It was that bad. He actually abolished it.
Like applied poorly and mediated through a system which is going to resist it because it has the existing wealth.
If you applied poorly, like Spain have got exemptions. So did they apply it poorly when they did it? Like, how would you apply it? What's the right way of applying it?
Ultimately, the reason that tax is done is because someone in society has identified, and people have realized that if you allow, if there's billions sat in one corner and there's some people who have nothing because the market's not going to be able to be accessible for them, there's some malfunctioning of society, both in terms of injustice, people starving, but also the fact that society won't function if there's not the cogs in all the places turning to be able to continually produce things and have everyone fed and make things happen in the country and such. So inevitably, this is a reaction to the capitalist market. The idea that the way power is distributed is too unequal, and so there needs to be some counterbalance through the state to try and redistribute and make things function some more. But
I'm asking about how would you apply the wealth tax better, not the sociology. How would you, in practical terms, how would you have applied it better? Would you stop people at airports? Like, what would you do?
Well, you're more rigorous. You keep the rates nice and high. You deconstruct the manner in which wealth is able to. Because I think what you were saying about the land tax is very important, right? Like you can't move a physical asset.
It's the smart man's wealth tax, as far as I'm concerned.
That doesn't mean that there's not also the need to channel and address the wealth that's hoarded by entities and corporations, and the fact that because we live in an economic society where money is something which has social value, that should also be addressed. However, it's also worth stressing that, especially from my perspective, because I don't think there's a when we're talking about like tax reform and such like that, these are ultimately caveats to a system which we're ultimately identifying as more of the wider problem. Like it's pragmatic to tax and have welfare state and such, but the wider problem that is wanted to be addressed is the fact that the inequality exists in the first place, right? It's like you can become the world's best doctor, like surgeon, for instance. You can be the world's best surgeon, and you can give people amazing heart transplants and such, and keep them in really good health. But at some point, it's worth saying, okay, why have so many people come through my door needing the transplant? Why are people in such poor health that they need my help all the time? Let's address the material conditions of the society that produces so many conditions like this. And so the same thing applies here. We should, as well as sort of taking money from wealthy entities to put back into society, we should be saying, well, why do we have these just massive organizations commanding so much wealth, but we need to tax them so much to be able to return them back to society? And part of that is inevitably linked into the way our markets have functioned for ages, where they have been given free rein almost to buy up and purchase vast chunks of the social fabric of society, and then have the power then to dominate in this industry, form the monopolies you were talking about earlier, and then someone comes in from a left-wing perspective and says, hey, maybe we should tax them a bit more, and is met with derision and skepticism, and can't even apply it properly. They can't even. It's like when like with this Labour government, right? Like they've, as we were saying earlier, like they start off with a policy, and then by the time it's passed, it doesn't have the same strength because it's been watered down or it's been tampered with by the more right-wing forces within the same entities.
Well, that's a very, you're talking about sort of structures and sociological structures. And I think, because I remember reading, Marx actually did not approve of a welfare state. Because in his eyes, if you have a welfare state, you're still propping up capitalism.
Yeah, well, you still.
And that's where you start to have
right?
a lot of. That's when you start. The problem. This is when you get splits within Marxism, because you then get people say who disagreed with Marx, thought he was, wrong on that, blah blah blah. But you're fundamentally right. It is to do with the structure. And for me, I think a solution to that structure is through, I'd like to try and, in some ways, I want people to have aspiration, yes, but I also think there needs to be I think we need to see people feel like they're earning a share in their sort of work and feel value in their work. Because the problem with post sort of capitalism or post industrialization and now late stage capitalism is that once we started to have technology and automation, people began to feel alienated in their work. So a carpenter, he might have not been paid, well, one, it was a skilled job, so he might have been paid quite good. It depended how good your clients and customers were, but or how good you bartered. But he still felt worth in his labour, even if he wasn't getting paid a lot, because it was all handmade and he had like a relationship with that labour. It felt like he had worth and value. And the problem that we have today, and this is where automation is going to be becoming quite important in AI, because I think if we get this right, AI, if we can get to the point where, for me, that is where I think we're going to get a true left-wing society, as you would want to describe it. I think if we get this right, and we could get technology and AI, even robotics, if they can do everything for us, I think we wouldn't need to have capitalism by that point, because we could all share the resources, enjoy the abundanceness, because there's this theory of abundantness. We might get to a place where we might have an abundant society. I'm not too sure about that, but I've heard both the left and the right talk about AI, meaning we could have abundance. I think if we get to that stage, that would make us so less slavish to work, and we can all become poets and writers, do creative arts, enjoy leisure time, blah, blah, blah. So I think this is one of those turning the curve moments, AI. What I worry is that if it's not addressed, then we are probably going to have a blink and we'll miss it moment where actually everything stays the same and just the wealthy get super, super wealthy. I've changed. I'm not even sure if I looked at a universal basic income. I'm quite supportive of it, but then I've heard arguments that the right like it, so I need to actually research whether. But it's weird. UBI, both the left and the right like it, so I'm a little bit suspicious when the right like it. So I probably need to do a bit of research why that is. So
it's quite a surprise. But no, what you're saying about AI and automation and computer technology really improving is something I fundamentally agree with, right? Like there's something really special that we could be doing to actually get to the stage where we don't need as almost any physical labor, and everyone can instead dedicate like we could have that could be our moment of actually let's democratize and improve our society. But this is where capitalism comes in again, because what you've said there about the chance is scuppered if it's not done in the name of democracy, but it's just someone's like financial ticket to ride off into the sunset, whilst the rest of the world's left to burn and wither. Because like AI, when it's used like a computer being able to work out its own decisions and therefore apply the best ones to a certain situation, like that is something which could be really fantastic. But if it's used in a manner which, say, requires tons of carbon emissions to be realized, and is done at the expense of like thousands of people, yeah, exactly, like water usage, data processing costs, the fact that it's been done haphazardly with no ethical concerns, it's being used for all sorts of shady, under the table practices. These come about because we've not divorced ourselves yet from the capitalist structures, which ultimately, as Rocaz said earlier in the stream, and by the way in the chat, if we start asking questions and such, I will be getting to. I've neglected as quite a lot, which I want.
I'm just happy there are people happy to hear me rambling and going off on tangents.
No. So I mean, I've been doing that as well. To be fair, I am trying to find where it was. Where on earth? Oh, he said something.
I mean, I do have ADHD, but you get to the point where you think actually it's probably just my personality, because I think I've used it as a bit of a crutch sometimes. Like, oh no, it's this, but hey.
Here we go. Yeah. American corporations are required by law to be craven profit seekers, right? So you've got clearly a problem, because you and I and lots of people want to see tech used to help everyone. They see it as another tool to success of their bank account and such. And so you get the almost adverse effect of AI, instead of being used to really improve society, being a massive threat to green progress, because you're actively pouring tons of resources and carbon emissions we can't afford to be emitting into the profit of a handful of tech corporations that are also, by the way, in government right now, writing more business-friendly laws and scrapping existing regulations. So I think that when we're talking about anything to do with like future programs and such, we've got to address the situation, especially the environmental angle as well. Like the fact that we're in a climate crisis, I think really makes the urgency that bit more alarming. Like we've got to really think about why people want the urgent wealth taxes and reforms and the descaling of the free market and the nationalisation of lots of things. It's not just that we believe it's something which is pragmatic and good to do. It's also a case that we're thinking out the world's survival, because we can't literally sustain much more of our current capitalist economy, because it's literally destroying the planet. And I think that is why Zach Polanski and the Greens, to draw us right back to what we were saying earlier, like whilst I get what you're saying about you might feel that it's a little bit too buzzwordy and a bit too much of a populist and not as balanced as much, I would say the opposite is true. We need, if anything, as radical as that seems to a lot of people, it's got to come from there, because it's not enough to continue with the status quo, especially in this moment.
Oh, I agree. I think in terms of opening space for this debate, I think he's done a really good thing. I mean, the fact that milquetoast centrist dad Ed Davey was calling out tax exiles in Dubai probably had a lot of it. It was probably inspired and influenced. It was through Zach Polanski influenced his need to do that. Again, whether it was, I mean, I've actually got a friend who he has a sister from Dubai, and it's his first time I've talked about it, because I've been very quiet on the topic, because he thought he was being quite insensitive. And he's a Lib Dem himself. He thought he was being very insensitive. I agreed it was probably not the best time to do it. But if I was being honest, a part of me did think, well, he was trying to make a point for people like Isabel Oakeshott. You know, I think he was trying to separate people like my friend's sister, who, out of chance, they just happened to work there. They lived and worked in the UK, and then they just got this job opportunity. Yeah, they don't pay tax, but they're not doing it as tax exiles. I think there's a separation between that and people like Isabel Oakeshott, who makes a career undermining the UK and pays no tax. So I think my friend was being a bit unfair on his criticism there, Davey. But I think that's right. I think Zach Palensky has given some much needed debate. And like I said, it's all about choice. And I think for too long now, we'll see come the election of 2029. I think tactical voting is going to have to play a very big important player if we're still stuck with this rotten electoral system. But I think he's given much needed space and debate, that is needed. It's about choice as well. We need people to have choice in their politics, and I think, and also it just, because I think a lot of people felt abandoned from the Blair years or Blair Brown years. Ed Miliband tried to move it slightly to the left, then Jeremy Corbyn gave it kind of revival, and then they were abandoned again by Keir Starmer. So I definitely think there is a space for people to have that kind of politics, even if again, it's not a moral question for me. I think Zach Palensky is right to say we should be challenging people who are the rich and powerful, who hoard their money into investments or properties or land or whatever. I just think the mechanics is not the correct one, but still, he's opened up this conversation, and I think it was well needed. So credit where credit's due. I will say, I think Zach Palensky has done a good call there. Obviously, you could go deep. You could start getting quite deep about the whole structures and stuff, because we mentioned earlier, you hit the nail on the head. The fact that we got people who are super wealthy. It's not the tax. It should also be about how did they get there, and how do we slowly unravel it, because it's a bit like the water company. So Thames Water, you've built up all this debt, and there's been a lot of talk about nationalisation, which I agree. I think over time we should probably either have cooperatives or nationalisation. I do think there is a space for nationalisation, so I'm not completely unopposed to nationalisation. For example, railways, I can't see that being a cooperative personally. I think you do probably need some kind of, for logistic purposes, you probably do need to have a nationalised railway that goes around the country, and there's a bit of planning, a bit of civil servants, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it can happen, I don't know. But anyway, nationalisation of water. My instincts agrees with people on the left who say, yes, we should nationalise them. But the only problem is, if you look at the reality, they actually pay out a lot of people's pensions. So a lot of these, and this is how they end up, basically they keep a lot of people to hostage, because this is what they do. They actually tie up a lot of their money to shore up people's pension funds. And the problem is that if you're going to nationalise Thames Water, you're going to have to take the debts as well. Now, a lot of taxpayers will say, well, why should we be nationalising the water and then taking on the debts? I would agree. It's like, well, they caused this mess. But then you enter another problem. If you do a kind of Venezuela example where you only nationalise the core assets, then that means you're going to basically be saying to people who've had pension funds through Thames Water, your pension's going to go down. You're literally going to get, in fact, you might not even get a pension. So there has to be a kind of honest conversation with people when it comes to that. So if we're going to nationalise it, you're going to have to probably say, we'll nationalise the core bit and we'll take on the pension funds.
Yeah.
Because the easy option would be to say, let's nationalise but not take on the debts. And then if you start doing that, then you're going to start having a problem then.
But Andy, I
it
don't
becomes
think that,
it becomes easy for other governments to just say, well, actually, we'll just take this anyway. We won't compensate. I mean, at least Clement Attlee, he compensated those industries.
Yeah, but I don't think though, Andy, that there's like, because I get what you're saying, right? Like, of course, the existing things that
would you tell
pensions and
voters
such.
we're going to nationalise water, but your pension's going to be completely evaporated? I mean, that's what you'd be telling voters.
But I don't think that it's as black and white as that, right? Because it's not as though it's not as though when people advocate for nationalisation,
that's what I'm saying. It isn't black and white, but that's why I disagree with. This is where I get frustrated, because we do try and present things as black and white. Because all I'm hearing is nationalise water, but I'm not hearing how this is going to be paid for.
But that,
and are they going to take on the debts?
But Andy, part of that is explained by, as we said earlier, our media ecosystem thrives on the flashy headline, nationalise this, and then because there's no thought given to what is being said beyond that, you get rather cheap. It's like when someone said,
my argument's not cheap.
No, not yours. Not yours, Andy.
I've literally said, if we're going to nationalise, you have to take on the debts.
Andy, that wasn't what I was saying.
Is that going to be now? Would voters be happy with that? But then you're also telling those voters those debts are tied to your pension funds. So if you've got a pension through this, if we don't nationalise and take on the debt, then you might not. Your pension savings would be. It's wrong. I agree. It's wrong what Thames Water did.
When I said
in that situation, but you have to also be honest with voters.
Okay, when I said cheap arguments, I wasn't talking about what you were saying. I was referring to when a left-wing argument is made in public and a clickbaity response is given. Like, I believe that capitalism is flawed. So you support what happened in the Soviet Union would be an example of a cheap argument that's given in response to something. So when people advocate for nationalising things, of course, they are also saying, we're going to have that critical analysis of what has taken place, and we're going to also support the people who've been working in these corporations and have their livelihoods wrapped up in the financial structures which are being moved from private corporation to government entity. But firstly, I think that it's absolutely the case that they would be looked after and they're not going to see their livelihoods implode. But secondly, the potential because inevitably there's going to be some people in those corporations who maybe are not as wealthy as they were prior to the nationalisation, but that is far outweighed by the people who now, with a better managed, less corrupt water system, are going to now have that democratic control of a key essential like water. Are not going to see millions in these organisations disappear off into some corporate CEOs bank account somewhere, and critically, they're not going to have E. coli laden water outbreaks, and like in Devon where they had to have bottled water for weeks because they didn't. I can't remember where in Devon it was. It was north, but they you've got all these terrible things happening because privatization's not managed it properly, which I think vastly outweigh it. Like in some ways. It's like when if there's some disaster and you send like a geographical ecological disaster, right, and you send people in to administer immediate relief, and maybe it disrupts some business practices and some day-to-day events and such, but you recognize that clearly the disaster is more important. If people in this situation, because Thames Water, is, as we said earlier, like it's not exactly like we've been doing a few little errors. It's some pretty major flaws in how we've been running it. And I think this comes back to as well. You said about morals. You have to say morals, and you can see morally why people on the left and have these rather strong positions on things and such, and you agree with a lot of them. But in my mind, we should be trying to make our actions as close to those morals as possible, right? Because the reason we have those morals is because we want a better life for people. So whilst I agree that compromise pragmatically can be good, and in our current existence in 2026, if we accept the premise that we might still have a capitalist system tomorrow, month's time, year's time, etc., of course we shouldn't, we should still try and act to do the best we can in that system. In the same way that, when if you are, say, an F1 team and your car maybe isn't the best car on the grid, you're still going to try and fix that car to be as fast as possible and still try and compete in a race and such. You should also think, okay, what though is actually undermining our morals? What is making it tricky to realize this justice? And ultimately, it's the corporate entity which hogs the resource and stops us from, that not only stops us having democratic control of our human essentials, but also implicates vast parts of the economy, so that when we try and do things which are just, someone then says, well, what about all these workers who are now dependent on this massive entity? And rather than have, and as we know, the corporation could probably still afford to support those workers beyond its absolvency, but it won't, because its commitment is to its shareholders, and so the ones who are at the lower rungs of the corporate ladder are just sort of left to fend for themselves. Like, that's another failing of the system. I will say that whilst I am really enjoying this, and I'd be very happy to continue it in another chat, we may have.
Oh wow, we've gone for
yes,
quite some
I was
time.
just 2 hours we're approaching. So whilst I'm not saying we're going to end it dead here, our finish line
fine.
may be in sight. And what I will say to the chat as well is, in a minute, I'm going to go through and sort of highlight a few of the comments that you might be nice to talk about before we finish. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask, do so now, and we'll start putting them on the screen for us to chat about. But I'll let you come back onto that, Andy, because that point about morals, do you not think that there's a need for our morals to be more concretely realised in our political discourse?
I agree. I do agree with that. I mean, the question is that I think, I always like to say, like, I'm going to invite you on my personal background. I'm a gay man, but I'm a Christian, and I've got a friend who's recently converted to Islam, and he was my friend at school. He's again gay, white, male. And we both had this very interesting conversation, because he's like, "Oh, are you surprised?" I said, "No." I said, "At the end of the day, I think we're going on different paths, but we're all going on that same journey." And that's basically where I am. So I agree that I think we should have morals, and I think they are important, and also having values. And I think I agree with you that I'm going on that same journey, but just on a different path. So I'm a bit more reformist when it comes, because again, you've invited, you said, you said about, we've talked about tax a lot. Now, a true Marxist would say, well, it shouldn't be about tax and nationalisation. We need to completely uproot the system itself. And then there's going to be revolutionary Marxists who say, well, we shouldn't do it through democracy. We need to have a violent revolution or whatever. So there's different people take on different. So people might be going on that journey, but they have different paths. And I think what we need to appreciate more in politics, because Reform and the Tories, particularly Reform, they've tried to make politics so polarizing and divisive. And I think right now what's more important is that we actually have a politics that can be civil, that could be hopeful as well, and give real change. Yeah, so I agree with you. But also, just be mindful that we are better together and working towards a pluralistic and being cooperative. I would be in no doubt if there was a coalition, a three-way coalition, compromises will have to be made. And there'll be some bit, for example, let's say Zach wanted the wealth tax. He got his way. I'm not going to hold my nose up to it. I would want it to work. I'll have my own views on it. I'll think it might not work, and I would prefer a land value tax, as I said earlier. But if I was in the party, I would not be, and I would try not to antagonize, because I think, you know what? Let's try and make it work. I've got my own views. It's having that conversation. It's about that transaction conversation. So to sum it up again, I think we all going on the same, like those in the progressive, the left, whatever, We're going on the same journey. We're just taking different paths and roads. And I think right now, I'm just so conscious about how toxic and divisive politics is, mostly. And it is sadly coming from the right. I mean, I know Green socialists who, like me and you, we've had this conversation and we have deep conversations about, and I'll say, well, oh no, that's a bit off, whatever. But we've always remained civil, polite, and courteous, and appreciating that we all want people to just succeed in life and to have income security and just be a bit more hopeful in politics. Sorry, that was such a tangent.
No, not at all. Not at all. And there's some really lovely parts in there as well. Because I absolutely agree that, it's a bit of a, I don't want to say meme, but everyone should be civil and hopeful and stuff. But I do think it's there's so much negativity and nastiness and just sort of a lack of even being the idea that you speak to people with an element of, this is another human being and I'm still going to actually consider this humanity as I'm interacting is lost on so many people. Like I don't like the word memification, but it almost feels like that, where there's just so much nasty, vitriolic online trolling elements to how political discourse is conducted, even in House of Parliament. How Kemi Badenoch does her PM keys is just so removed from how it ought to be done. And so I absolutely think there's an importance to maintaining that civility and that hope and that being able to, the hypothetical coalition being able to sit down at a table and think, okay, clearly we don't all agree, but we can all sort of come together and recognise the common good of stopping fascism and such. Completely agree with that. And I wish more people would certainly take that just being courteous and nice to people is a good value to have, even if it's not in service of the massive change we want. There is still a value in treating each other as human beings and being nice and such. What I would then say following that is that there's no reason this civility and this hope can't also be reflected in our tangible material politics, because one of the reasons I would say I have the opinions that I do, I'm left-wing, I would say I'm a socialist, quite overtly. I certainly...
I'll bring my dad up next time. He can come visit me and debate with him.
and I will stand by, the as you probably gather, right, the anti-capitalist critiques I've had. And whilst I would say I'm definitely pragmatic and I would be full on board with, standing side by side and trying to stop the reform Tory elements from being there.
I think sadly in this election it's going to have to be, and until we get, even when we have PR, there's going to be, the reality is, you guys have got, assuming you're a Green member or you're at least supportive of the Greens, but they've jumped up to 21% in YouGov, which is fantastic. So who knows, maybe in a PR situation, they might get 40-45% of the vote, close to 50, and they would only need a few handful of Labour people or Lib Dems to work with them. So I think it is important to have values, yes. And my values are I do believe in a separation between state and the free market. I don't want to overthrow the free market, but I at least understand there's an injustice when it comes to the interference of free markets in the state, and just my more reformist element. Because if I'm being completely honest with you, Owen, even used to be a Marxist, I've read Marx, and even though my views have evolved and changed now, on the fundamental question about whether capitalism is a very flawed system. He is right on that. Marx is right. It is a flawed system, and all his criticisms of capitalism is actually correct. I think for me, it was more. It's more what do we do to replace it? How can we replace it?
A question of pragmatism more than of methodology, almost.
In my heart, I'd probably say I'm probably more of a lefty than my head. If I could put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of people have that same opinion. To be honest with it, I feel like. Just to finish off what I was saying a second ago, like
Sorry.
I think
Excuse
no,
you.
it's fine.
Sorry.
It's fine, absolutely fine. This again, Rockaz sort of captured what I was thinking quite quickly. Like I think the agreement that I would want everyone on a sort of anti-fascist coalition to have would also, I think, be tempered with that wanting to go somewhere beyond that. And I think, to be honest, we are in agreement on quite a few things. I think it's just that, in my mind, those steps need to be more urgent and more immediately radical than perhaps yours. But even then, I would be if I
I'd
woke
agree
up
with my own
and
party. I think we should be a bit more urgent and radical.
exactly. But no, it's an interesting one. I'm going to quickly now go through some of the stuff that I have seen. Feel free to do the same if you want to pick out anything in the chat. But there was this one sort of caught early on. If not for austerity, we'd not have such desperate apolitical normie masses being enticed by these right-wing populists. What are your thoughts on this one?
I think the banking. I still think we still live under the shadow of the banking crisis. A lot of people think Brexit was the year zero for when we started to see a rise of sort of right-wing populism, but I think the banking crisis started it because I think if you, like you said, if people had good income security, job security, their lives was going good, as it was, I mean, admittedly, as it was before the banking crisis, not for everyone, but generally, under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, people were doing fine. I know my family personally did because they brought in working tax credits, which helped my family out. I was a free school meals kid, and I remember I saw the improvements for my during those times. And then, but I think if people had good income security, housing security, and job security, which we are lacking at the moment, then I think all the other problems go away. People start thinking less about immigration, trans, and stuff like that by lifting people's their sort of their the economic bits. It evaporates all the rest. It's a shame that it has to be that way, but I tend to find that's what tends to happen if people feel better in their pocket and in terms of their housing situation. Then yeah. So yeah.
I mean, I do agree with quite a bit of that, because I think that you're quite right. Like it's a lot of the problem is that fascists come in and take the offer a bad solution to a problem that does exist. It's not the years of austerity or Brexit or the fact that taxpayer had to bail out dodgy banks and such. It's the trans people. It's the immigrants. I definitely agree that's one of the things. I also though think that firstly, the crisis, austerity is a symptom of the capitalist class wanting to expand its market power. The corporate benefits of austerity are clearly quite big if you can take control of failing state industries and such. And there's also, I think, the fact that despite all the horridness in society, most people are not fascist. Even in our horrid 2026, where you got Reform running around and Trump blowing up stuff and all this horrible stuff, most people don't like them and don't support them. And in some ways, it's the mismanagement of our democracy almost, which is as much a problem as. And obviously, austerity is a terrible thing, but it's also that the fact, as we've been saying, as both of us have been saying all along, right? Like if we had a better voting system, then you would not have quite as much alarm at Reform polling at not even 30% and yet potentially going to win a majority. So yeah, I do agree.
Agree, and even if we had it before 2010, because Labour and the Lib Dems together would have locked out the Tories, but sadly the numbers were, and this is what I have to remind people on the left, it's like, yes, I think naturally it would have been better if the Lib Dems went in coalition with Labour. We have just got a more natural relate. I mean, Labour haters, the irony is they really hate the Lib Dems, whereas
it's that political power, isn't it? People like that, they
tend to hate us more than the Tories, which is ironic considering we But the maths wasn't there, and I have to remind people that the maths was just not there in 2010, sadly.
Party politics, isn't it? It's not fun. Not a nice part of one of the many faults of our system. There was another one which I saw. This one from Ben Martic Cucumber Snatch.
Our socially left wing, but abandoned left wing.
So, what do you think of this one? This is another comment someone's made in the chat.
I think you need to be a bit up to date on the socially left wing bit. But abandoned. Yeah, because I think, they. Well, I mean, I think I can understand the socially left wing bit in terms of like racial equality and gay rights, less so on immigration and trans rights these days. But I always thought it was a very superficial surface level anyway for me. But yeah, I think they definitely have abandoned left wing economic policies. Well, apart from that Corbyn, when they had Jeremy Corbyn,
exactly. Right.
But
I mean, I do think it's tricky because it's such a, as we've sort of demonstrated over the last 2 hours plus, like it's clear that there's a lot of nuance and a lot of different elements within parties, and there's clearly, like it's not the case that there's been nothing nothing to the left of where things were previously from Labour, because as you said, and I'm from the sounds of it, if you were finishing primary school at the end of John Major, I'm only a little bit younger than you. So whilst I was not alive during John Major's time, I remember smart boards being put into schools. I remember when that happened. Like there was clearly some benefit to having not a conservative government from first decade of the 21st century, and equally not having Labour for the last few years up until Starmer were quite bad as well, right? So there is clearly some benefit, but as has been clearly pointed out here, like the social signalling to justice and equality and having a more diverse government, say, but economic policies which ultimately are leading more to that fiscal, neoliberal, corporate-friendly conditions, which ultimately then don't support the public services and such enough, and don't offer the justice in terms of wealth inequality and all the things we've been discussing. So I would agree with this. You're quite right to point out that Corbyn tried to move back and then unfortunately received quite a lot of not just from the media sort of covering him as though he was like the reincarnation of Vladimir Lenin or something, but also like people in the party as well a lot of people in the party acted against him and didn't make his case easier, which then led to the
I'm going to defend him because a lot was made about the anti-Semitism, and they did that internal report and it vindicated him. It proved actually he was, he did everything he could within Labour to stop anti-Semitism, and actually it was his opponents used anti-Semitism as a tool, as a weapon to weaponize him.
Yeah.
And even though he's not my personal politics, I actually have a lot of sympathy, if not empathy, for Jeremy Corbyn. And I think the way he was treated by Keir Starmer was absolutely disgraceful.
Absolutely. One of the many reasons I think there's that needs to be so critical of the current Labour government is the fact that they basically have demonstrated themselves to be full of career political sort of machinations, right-wing.
Well, it was Morgan McSweeney. He was just obsessed with making sure even the soft left was locked out, because I think a successful Labour government, even a centrist one, is one that has a balanced cabinet. So you have a balanced cabinet. It's what worked for Howard Wilson. It's what worked for the early premiership of Tony Blair, because even he had quite a few socialists in his cabinet. They were given quite minor cabinet positions in the scheme of things, but still he had them in. Jeremy Corbyn voted against Blair hundreds of times. He never delisted him from the party, and that's how successful Labour leaders should be. They don't try and antagonise the left. you
they
yeah,
ideally they would represent the left entirely, right?
in
I mean,
some
there's a
way.
whole conversation to have about balance and centrism and what is the ideal sort of proportion and such. But we will not have the time
I
probably in this stream.
no,
But
it's been at the center. Like the center right claims to be the center now, which I take a lot of issue with. Like,
well, it's the shifting of the Overton window, isn't it? It's the
yeah,
idea
that's it.
that they've dragged us through decades of right wing policies and then try and claim, there's a thing. As Rockhouse has just put in the chat again, balanced
Ah,
cabinet, half wrong and half wronger. There
I
was
think
another one from.
Howard Wilson said something. The Prime Minister's sector's cabinet, the wrong half. Um,
Yeah.
which
There's another one from Robin. Minority groups are not powerful blocks. It's easy to leave them
I saw
behind. And
that
this is
one.
an interesting one because I think this is one that really speaks to another element of not democratic functioning. There are more people that support progressive left-wing ideals in this country than don't. But because a lot of them don't vote, or more accurately, aren't franchise. I mean, I know it's not as bad as in the UK as it is in America, but there's that lack of franchisement. In fact, it's harder to vote as a young person than it is a demographic that's a bit older and more likely to maybe vote reform or conservative. Like for instance, I am a university student. I can't use my university ID cards to vote in a general election. However, if you're an older person, you can use all sorts of things to
Yeah, your
cast your
bus
vote.
pass,
Yeah, no, exactly. So like
which you
things like that,
get
I
for
think are really
free.
important. Yeah,
No, you're right, and I think for me, I'd love to see a lobby group for the poor and the working class because we don't get they don't get anything. And as much as I mean, this is where I'm going to disagree with the Lib Dems because they were against the farmers' tax. I actually think changing it made no sense to me why farmers were excluded. They make it sound like it'd been there for years. No, it was Nigel Lawson in the 80s. He changed the law to exempt agricultural lands to be part of inheritance. It made no sense to me. I think if it's wealth and inheritance, then should just be taxed like anyone else. Um, but I was angry because it's like, well, where's the lobby groups for the people on the council estates, the people who are poor, the people who are working class, and yet people bend over backwards for the rich, and they're not all rich. There's some asset, there's some asset poor, income poor farmers, or they got really, it's just all land and hardly any equipment or whatever. But still, my case being, it's not fair
no,
that
it isn't. It's that market capitalist force again. Because as well as it, I mean, it's easy to imagine it when, as you've just said, you envision some sort of hard on their luck farmer that's really pulling their weight and such. But a lot of the time, it's like corporate entities which have actually taken quite a lot of farmland under a conglomerate and are masquerading as jack of all trades, hardworking. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like some character in an old English tale or something when it's
and
actually more.
And we know Jeremy Clarkson deliberately created a farm to avoid paying. He pretty much admitted to that to Victoria, Derbyshire. So the
Yeah.
fact that it needed to be closed, that loophole, and I'm surprised it took this long really to close it because it was so obvious to me that if you don't want to pay any tax on inheritance, you just go and buy a piece of land and call it a farm, get 2 sheep, and then that's it. Just say, oh, it's a farm now. So no, my party was wrong on that, and I think Labour was right until they rolled back on it.
And then one more. This one caught my eye. Rusty Brown Ring Donut. It's a curious name. So this
Thank
one.
you so much, everyone. By the way, I was surprised. Yeah, sorry,
So
Erin.
that's all right. So this one was just. So it caught my eye because I thought it sort of speaks to some of that misinformation of us. Because like the idea that the potholes in the street and people's cost of living crisis is somehow being caused by like a rainbow flag appearing somewhere is sort of almost just like divorced from reality almost because it's like it's not as though it's not yeah we could fix the roads and make the trains run on time and make your bills go down, but instead like we put £1 billion into the pride flag. Like it's just not the case, right? Like I don't know if you get, because I've heard this so many times from people. I don't know if you ever hear this sort of stuff, but
Yeah, yeah, it's misinformation. They don't get most of it comes from sponsors, charity donations. I mean, there's actually a lot of controversy at Pride events because Birmingham, there's quite a few sponsors who've had links to Israel, and we all know what's going on over there. And so no, it's a lot of it misinformation about the Pride stuff. It's hard. The fact that Reform did this their own version of Doge and they could not find any savings to squeeze out more from the local authorities, and now are going to put up council tax bills even more because they wasted money doing this their own version of Doge is evident that actually it's not a lot of money, really. Yeah.
no, exactly. Like, and it's a society can celebrate its diversity and celebrate the Black Lives Matter, Black History Month, and Pride and disability rights and gender
Women's
equality and all these
History
things.
Month now.
Exactly right. Like, there's all sorts of things which are good to have in society, and they're not in any way a risk to people's other finances. Like, if you genuinely believe that there was like a choice, that it was like if you genuinely believe there wasn't enough money, like surely the issue then is with, again, the lack of funding for councils and the fact that they can't spend as much as the local Amazon warehouse can on its day-to-day events and such. But no, I think we'll come to our finish line there. Thank you everyone for listening. Andy, it's been a pleasure talking. And we'll have to do a part 2 at some point, or do have one of the many other tangents we went on this conversation, explored more in full.
Definitely.
But it's been a pleasure. Live stream's going to end here. Thanks again, guys, and take care all. Enjoy your weekend all.